Today we are going to taste a Verdicchio from the Marche in central eastern Italy, a region which is kind of parallel with Umbria but closer to the coast. The most celebrated white grape variety from that region is Verdicchio, which is a relatively old grape variety. Records date back to about the 14th century, which is a fairly good age. There are two main zones for Verdicchio, and the smaller of these, the Metallica zone, is where the example that we're tasting today comes from. It's an incredibly green grape variety in colour, which is where the name comes from. It's not, as some people believe, based on the fact that there is a certain green character to the flavours of this grape variety, although there are. In bad examples, which are just not very well grown, you get really an unpleasantly acidic, astringent taste. But in the best examples, even though they're richer, there's still this really wonderful, very fresh, very lemony acidity, which is what I really love about it. For a long time, as was common with a lot of grape varieties in central Italy, Verdicchio was fermented on the skins throughout, which gave a style of wine that was incredibly rich and very viscous and very textural, which is what happens when you ferment whites with their skins. Actually, completely delicious. There's a bit of a trend towards doing that again these days in Italy. When people started fermenting in a much more modern way, which was in stainless steel containers, usually taking the skins away completely, the style of Verdicchio that we really know today came to be born. And that is a wine that's really primarily about amazingly fresh, citrusy characters without being too thin and mean. Underneath that, there's definitely an extra layer of slightly nutty richness, kind of bitter almond flavours, which just balances out the acidity a bit. It is a grape variety that's grown elsewhere in Italy, and probably most famously in Soave, where it's known as Trebbiano di Soave. And it's seen as a grape variety that just adds a bit of freshness to the slightly more floral flavours of Garganega, which is, of course, the slightly more traditional Soave variety. The example that we sell, that I really, really am a huge fan of, comes from a very small producer. Obviously, they only have 3.5 hectares. They grow completely organically, so there's absolutely no nasty and disgusting residues in this. And they make quite a basic style. There's a trend these days towards oaking Verdicchio, which actually sometimes works quite well. And there's also a trend towards making very smart kind of single vineyard Verdicchios, which also can be lovely, usually quite a bit more expensive. But I actually like the fact that this is a much more everyday example, at a more everyday price, that you don't really have to stand on ceremony much when you're drinking. So, on the nose, I can actually smell it from here, it's terrifically lemony and citrusy, with already a bit of nuttiness to it, kind of milky, fresh almond richness. Ooh, that wakes you up in a good way. So on the palate, definitely lots of citrus, but actually very specific citrus. Citrus is often a very generic term. Actually quite kind of lemon pithy and lemon peely, which is lovely. And underpinning that, this smoky nuttiness, which balances out perfectly. This is really one of the things I most want to drink on a nice hot summer's day, or if I'm eating fish or salads or slightly lighter foods. And the fact that it's made so completely naturally without any chemical intervention is a great bonus.